It began like any other morning, until it didn't. The sun had barely crested the horizon over Charleston, its pale gold light filtering through the ancient Spanish moss that draped the live oaks like tattered lace. The air carried the salt-kissed dampness of the nearby harbor, mingling with the faint scent of magnolia blossoms. The Charleston Federal Courthouse, a stately relic of neoclassical architecture, loomed ahead, its stone steps worn, smooth by centuries of footsteps of the powerful, the desperate, and the invisible. And then there was Celeste Monroe. She emerged from her silver Buick with the quiet grace of someone who moved through the world deliberately. Her navy blue blazer was impeccably tailored, her slacks knife-creased, her posture radiating an unspoken authority. In her hand, a slim leather portfolio. Inside, the weight of a career spent navigating the razor's edge of justice. She didn't wear her judicial robe outside the courtroom. Never. It was a choice, a reminder to herself that before the bench, she was a woman. A black woman. And in places like this, that meant something. Her heels clicked against the courthouse steps, each step a measured declaration. She could feel the eyes of the early morning stragglers, law clerks, janitors, a harried public defender, flicker toward her. Some nodded in recognition. Others glanced away just as quickly. To them, she was either Judge Monroe or just another face in the system. Today, fate would decide which. The security checkpoint was a bottleneck of humanity. Lawyers in rumpled suits, defendants in handcuffs, tourists gawking at the marble grandeur. Celeste merged into the line, her gaze sweeping the room. She'd walked this gauntlet 100 times. But today, the energy shifted the moment Deputy Hank Riker locked eyes on her. Riker was a relic, a bulldog of a man with a face like weathered brick, and a reputation for turning routine checks into power plays. His arms were crossed, his stance wide, his gloved hand already raised before she'd even reached the metal detector. "Ma'am." He barked, voice like gravel. "Step out of line." Celeste paused. "A beat too long." "Is there a problem, officer?" Riker's gaze dragged over her. Her silver locks coiled neatly against her scalp, the crisp lines off her blazer, the unflinching calm in her eyes. Something about her bothered him. She looked like she belonged. And in his world, people like her needed reminding of their place. No ID displayed. He muttered more to himself than to her. "Can't just waltz in here looking like that." Celeste reached into her blazer, producing her federal credentials with a flick of her wrist. The badge caught the light, its engraved seal glinting. Riker didn't even look. He snatched it from her fingers, gave it a cursory glance, then pocketed it. Her eyebrow arched. "I'd like that returned." He stepped closer, his breath sour with coffee and contempt. "You in a rush to get somewhere, sweetheart?" The word hung in the air like a slap. Nearby, a younger guard, a woman, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "I need to get to a courtroom," Celeste said, her voice steel, wrapped in silk. "Then you'll follow my procedure." Riker snapped. "Random checks?" "Let's go." Before she could protest, his hand clamped around her upper arm, steering her away from the crowd, down a side hallway, into a windowless room that smelled of antiseptic and sweat. The air inside was cold. Stark. A single steel chair sat in the center, flanked by a rolling cart off scanning equipment, and a pair of electric clippers, their cord coiled like a snake. Celeste's pulse thudded once, hard, against her ribs. "I don't consent to this." "You have no legal cause to detain me, you reactin' suspicious," Riker countered, nodding to the chair. "That's cause enough. Sit." She didn't move. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think that badge means something here?" "Not o' me." Then hands grabbed her. Two more officers materialized, one gripping her wrist, the other blocking the door. Celeste's voice rose, sharp as shattered glass. "This is a violation. I want your names." Noon answered. Riker lifted the clippers. The buzz of the motor filled the room, a sound like locusts descending. "What are you doing?" Celeste demanded. "Standard protocol." Riker sneered. "Could be hiding something, in that mop. She tried to rise. A hand shoved her back down. Then, the blades touched her scalp. A lock of silver hair tumbled to the floor. Then another. And another. Celeste didn't scream. Didn't cry. She sat perfectly still as her hair, her crown, her history, fell around her in twisted coils. The guard's laughter echoed off the tiles. She looks better already, one muttered. Riker wiped loose hairs from his sleeve. Now you representable. Celeste's fists clenched in her lap, her knuckles bone-white. But when she spoke, her voice wasily calm. You'll regret this. Riker smirked. People like you always say that. When it was over, Riker tossed her badge onto the desk and jerked his thumb toward the hall. Courtroom's that way. Celeste stood slowly. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury banked like a furnace. She retrieved her badge without a word, and walked out. The hallway stretched before her, a gauntlet of sidelong glances and muffled whispers. Her scalp burned where her locks had been. The clipper's buzz still rang in her ears. Two clerks passed her. They saw. They knew. And they looked away. Celeste didn't break stride. At the end of the corridor, the courtroom doors loomed. Inside, a high-profile police misconduct hearing was about to begin, a case involving officers who'd brutalized protesters. The room was packed with press, lawyers, and the very men who'd hidden behind badges to escape accountability. Celeste was supposed to enter from the judge's chambers, robe already donned, decorum pristine. Not today. She pushed the doors open, hard. The courtroom froze. Every head turned. Every conversation died mid-sentence. And then, the realization hit. The woman with the shorn scalp, the woman they just watched be dragged through security like a criminal, wasn't a victim. She was the judge. Celeste walked past the gawking crowd, her heels echoing like gunshots. Behind the bench, she reached for her robe, not as a symbol of power, but as armor. She turned to the clerk. Is the docket ready? The clerk stammered. Why, yes, Your Honor. Celeste sat. The leather groaned beneath her. She didn't look at Riker, not yet. We will begin, she said, her voice slicing through the silence. With Case 2371F, the United States versus the Charleston Police Department. Riker, still posted by the door, went pale. The storm had arrived. Celeste Monroe's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Because of you, she said. Her gaze locked on Riker. This courthouse, this temple of justice, has been stained. The words landed with the weight of a gavel. The air itself seemed to thicken, every breath drawn sharper, every rustle of fabric louder. The spectators, lawyers, journalists, clerks, sat frozen, as if the room had been plunged into ice. Riker stood in the center aisle, his face drained of color. The man who had sneered, sweetheart, hours earlier now looked like a cornered animal, his hands twitching at his sides. Celeste didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because of your actions, she continued. The sanctity of this court is now under question, and because you assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse. She paused, letting the horror of it sink in. You are now the subject of a criminal investigation. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Cameras flashed. Someone in the back row gasped. Celeste turned to the two officers flanking the exit. Escort Deputy Riker into custody. Separate from general population. Formal charges to follow. The officers moved before Riker could react. Metal cuffs glinted in the fluorescent light. Wait. Riker sputtered, stumbling back. You can't do this. But the cuffs clicked shut. He was wrong. She already had. The courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. The high ceilings, the polished wood, the seal of the United States, etched above the bench, none of it could mask what had just happened. Deputy Hank Riker, a man who'd spent 14 years bullying his way through these halls, was gone. Escorted out in cuffs, his badge confiscated, his power stripped bare. But the aftershock lingered. It was in the way the ceiling fans hummed a little too loudly. In the sidelong glances exchanged between clerks who'd known about Riker's behavior for years, and said nothing. In the way the defense attorneys shuffled papers, suddenly very interested in their legal pads, Celeste sat back in her chair, fingers laced together. Her robe draped over her shoulders like armor. There was no going back. And truthfully, she didn't want to. A knock at the chamber door. Her clerk, a young woman with a tablet clutched to her chest, peered in. "Your Honor, the next set of witnesses are being prepped. We have about 8 minutes. Celeste nodded, her eyes drifting to the empty gallery. The wooden benches, soon to be filled with jurors and reporters, still bore the ghost of Riker's presence, like an oil stain on marble. Then, another knock. This time, it was Megan, one of the interns. Early 20s, glasses fogged from rushing, her hands trembling. I saw it," Megan whispered. "What Riker did to you this morning? I didn't know what to do. I should have said something." Celeste studied her. The guilt. The fear. The shame of complicity. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently. "That matters." Megan's eye swelled. "I didn't stop it, no," Celeste agreed. "But you're speaking now. That's more than most." A beat. Then Megan straightened. "If you need me to testify, I will." Celeste reached across the desk, her hand covering Megan's. No words. Just warmth. "All rise." The courtroom surged to its feet as Celeste returned to the bench. The next witness was Howard Briggs, a black father in his mid-40s, his hands calloused from decades of warehouse labor. His son, 17 years old, had been tackled during a protest, his windpipe crushed under an officer's knee. 9 months later, the boy still couldn't speak above a whisper. Howard's voice cracked as he described begging for paramedics, being told his son was faking. Watching the officers walk away, without so much as a reprimand, Celeste didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Every word Howard spoke was a knife, slicing through the courtroom, laying bare the rod beneath the badge. When he finished, Celeste leaned forward. "Mr. Briggs, thank you for your courage." His eyes glistened. "I just want to know it meant something. That someone's finally listening." Celeste held his gaze, not as a judge, but as someone who'd been silenced too. "You've been heard," she said in her chambers. Celeste stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror didn't look like a judge. Her scalp was uneven, raw patches where Riker's clippers had torn through her silver locks, her crown, her history. She looked like someone who'd survived a war. Maybe that's what justice was. Not a performance. Not a ceremony. A battle. Another knock. Her clerk handed her a sealed motion. "The U.S. Attorney's Office wants to escalate charges against Riker. Federal, civil rights violations." Celeste didn't blink. "Good. Accept it." As the door shut, she finally let out a breath, not relief, resolve. Today wasn't over. The courtroom had seen Riker fall. But the real reckoning? It was just beginning. The DOJ agent paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "You should know, the footage from this morning has gone viral. CNN, MSNBC, social media. Even some Senate offices are talking about it." Celeste gave the faintest shake of her head. "I didn't do it for them." The man smiled. "No. That's why it matters." When he left, Celeste sank into her chair, the weight of the day pressing into her bones. Outside her chambers, she could hear the muffled chaos of the courthouse, defense attorneys huddling, papers shuffling, the nervous whispers of men who suddenly realized the ground had shifted beneath their feet. The fight wasn't over, but she was ready, because today wasn't just about exposing one racist bailiff. It was about pulling the mask off an entire system, and the reckoning had only just begun. By noon, the courthouse was no longer just a building, it was a stage for history. Word had spread like wildfire. First about Riker's arrest. Then the video. Then the woman at the center of it all, the federal judge who'd walked into her own courthouse as a black woman and been treated like a criminal, only to take her seat in the bench minutes later shorn but unbroken. The gallery was packed. Camera crews jostled for space at the back. Civil rights attorneys, some, who'd flown in overnight from D.C. and Chicago, sat shoulder to shoulder with community organizers. The air hummed with attention that had nothing to do with the case itself and everything to do with what it represented. Celeste stood behind the bench as her clerk leaned in. Defense is requesting special counsel. They claim the case is tainted. That you compromised. A slow breath escaped Celeste's lips. Of course. Every silenced voice holds power. If this story moved you, you're already part of the change. Subscribe to the Untold Stories, because truth grows louder when we listen together. They couldn't attack the facts, so they'd attack her. She straightened her robe. Let them ask. I'll answer on the record. All rise. The courtroom surged to its feet as Celeste entered. Every eye tracked her, some in awe, some in fear. A defense attorney in a pinstripe suit stood, his voice polished for TV. Your Honor, given recent events, we must question whether impartiality can. Celeste cut him off. You mean the assault I endured this morning? The attorney faltered. The perception of bias. Let me stop you right there. Celeste stepped to the edge of the bench. I was assaulted. Humiliated. Not for what I did, but for who I am. Because a man saw a black woman and decided she couldn't possibly hold power. The room held its breath. And how did he respond? Her voice sharpened. I took my seat. I followed every rule. I was calm when others were not. That's impartiality. The attorney's jaw clenched. Celeste leaned forward. You want to talk bias? Bias is a man with clippers shearing a woman's hair without cause. Bias is 12 ignored complaints buried by this courthouse. Bias is your firm, defending officers with rap sheets longer than their service records. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The attorney opened his mouth, then shut it. Celeste didn't blink. This court proceeds. I will not recuse myself. If you disagree, appeal.ill even hand you the forms. She brought the gavel down. Next witness. The prosecution called an unexpected figure, Denise Talley, a former courthouse record supervisor. Mid-50s, black glasses perched on her nose, her cropped hair as no-nonsense as her tone. Celeste recognized her instantly. Denise had worked here for 8 years, quiet, efficient, invisible. Until today, Miss Talley. The prosecutor asked. How many complaints against Riker crossed your desk? Denise's voice didn't waver. 12 official. Dozens unofficial. And what happened to them? A beat. Then, they vanished. Marked resolved by Judge Taryn Mahoney. The name landed like a grenade. Mahoney, retired. Respected. Celeste's own mentor. Denise continued, her voice gaining strength. He said exposing Riker would undermine public trust. That it'd make the courthouse look weak. Celeste's fingers tightened around her pen. That lie, just a sacrifice for appearances, was one she'd heard before. Denise looked up, her eyes blazing. I watched Riker terrorize people for years. And every time I spoke up I was told, that's just how it is. She paused, then shattered the silence. Well, not anymore. By afternoon, the courthouse steps were a sea of faces. Protesters. Grandmothers with signs. Teenagers live streaming on their phones. A man in a wheelchair held a poster. 12 complaints. 0 accountability. Inside, Celeste stared out her chamber window, the weight of the list Reverend Marcus Hill had given her heavy in her hands, names of victims who'd been silenced for years. The Reverend had said it plainly. They're ready to speak now, because of you. She closed her eyes. This wasn't just atrial anymore. It was a revolution. Back in court, the final witness took the stand. Andrew Taylor, a black U.S. Marshal with 20 years of service and a limp from a botched arrest. I worked here from 2004 to 2012, he said, his voice rough with regret. I saw what Riker did. I filed a report. It disappeared. He looked directly at Celeste. They told me he was the kind of man we want handling Difficult people. The gallery erupted. Celeste's gavel restored order, but not the old order. Taylor leaned forward. I left this job because of the guilt. But you, Judge Monroe? You sat in that chair after what they did to you. His voice broke. That's the kind of courage this system's been missing. The room fell silent. Celeste didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was finally loud enough on its own. The morning after the viral storm, Charleston's sky hung low and gray, a suffocating blanket over the city. But inside Judge Celeste Monroe's chambers, the silence was colder. On her desk lay a manila folder thick with secrets. It had appeared like a ghost, left by a court administrator who'd slipped in, set it down with trembling hands, and vanished. No words, just the unspoken truth: this will burn you. Celeste opened it. Inside, 12 dismissed complaints against Riker. 15 years of signatures. All bearing the same name at the bottom: Judge Terrence Mahoney. Her mentor. Her sponsor. The man who'd once told her, exactly what the bench needs. This isn't history, it's happening now. Stay ahead of the reckoning. Tap the bell so you never miss when the untold stories uncover what the world tried to hide. Now his handwriting mocked her from every page, allegation unsubstantiated. Lack of corroborating evidence. No further action required. And then, the memo. Buried at the back, a 5-year-old communication between Mahoney and courthouse security. Riker may be rough around the edges, but he keeps order, especially with certain groups. Best'll leave well enough alone. Celeste's fingers curled, crumpling the page. There it was, the quiet part said out loud. This wasn't about one bad cop. It was about the machine that had armed him, protected him, rewarded him. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't atrial anymore. It was a purge. A knock. Her clerk tense. Your Honor. The Senate Judiciary Committee is requesting your statement on judicial oversight failures. Celeste smirked. Of course. Now that the cameras were rolling. There's more, the clerk added. 2 retired judges and a former DA just resigned. Health reasons. Celeste didn't react. She stood, bring in the attorneys. All of them. We finished this today. An hour later, the gallery wasn't just full, it was a living thing. New York Times. BBC. Law students crammed shoulder to shoulder, notebooks open. This wasn't Charleston's story anymore. It was America's. Celeste took the bench. No preamble. Before closing arguments, I am entering new evidence into the record. She nodded to her clerk, who distributed copies of the damning folder. The defense attorney shot up. Objection. Celeste didn't raise her voice. Sit down. He did. She turned to the room. Let the record show, this court is no longer protecting institutions at the expense of people. We are no longer pretending silence is neutrality. Her gaze swept over every face, the guilty, the complicit, the afraid. Every signature in this folder represents a choice. To ignore victims. To shield predators. To trade justice for order. A beat. Then, softly, it ends today. The silence was so thick, a pen dropping would have sounded like a gunshot. Then, Your Honor? A man in his 60s stood near the door, hat clutched in shaking hands. May I speak? Celeste nodded. Louis Bryant. Arrested in 2011 for raising his voice when his daughter's case was dismissed. Riker had slammed him into a wall. Broken 2 ribs. I filed a complaint, Louis said. They told May tripped. He looked around. But I am here now. Celeste stood. Anyone else? Hands rose. 5. 10. 15. Stories spilled. A woman Riker had groped during a pat-down. A teenager he'd thrown into a holding cell for looking suspicious. A clerk he'd threatened for talking back. Celeste didn't cry. Didn't smile. She just let the truth rise. The final day began with rain, not a drizzle, but a deluge. The kind that floods streets and washes away lies. Still they came, protesters with umbrellas. Reporters in ponchos. Victims who'd waited years for this moment. Inside, the air hummed. Celeste entered, but this time, she didn't put on her robe. She folded it, laid it across the bench. "I've won this title for years," she said. "But I've stayed yet silent too long. Today, that changes." She turned to the room. "This court finds Hank Riker guilty. But it doesn't stop there." She held up a new folder, the Monroe Mandate. Anti-bias training for all courthouse personnel. Psychological screenings. Zero tolerance for discrimination. "I'll take this to the Senate if I have to," she said. "Because what happened to me should never happen again." Then, the doors opened, Riker entered cuffed, hollow-eyed. Celeste faced him. Not with hate. With fire. "You spent your career deciding who deserved dignity. Now you'll sit in the seat you made for others." She nodded to the officers. "Take him away." No cheers. No applause, just witnessing. And sometimes, that's more powerful. Nain didn't knock. She just walked into Celeste's chambers, unfolded a stool, and plugged in the clippers. "You ready?" she asked, meeting her sister's eyes in the mirror. Celeste touched the uneven patches on her scalp, the remnants of Riker's violence. "Yeah," she whispered. "Finish it." Nain worked slowly. The hum of the clippers was different this time, not a weapon, but a reclamation. Silver coils fell like liberated soldiers, each snip a surrender of shame. When it was done, Nain handed her a mirror. The reflection stared back, bald. Bold. Unbroken. "You could rock this every damn day and still own every room," Nain grinned. Celeste traced her scalp with trembling fingers. "This is who I am, now." Nain shook her head. "No. This is who you've always been." The world just finally caught up. That night, Celeste left the courthouse bareheaded under the city lights. Nawig. No scarf, just her truth, glowing like a beacon. An elderly black woman stepped forward, her hand shaking as she touched Celeste's arm. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did." Celeste squeezed her hand. "You did more than survive. You paved the road." Behind her, a teenager pulled off her hoodie, revealing a freshly shaved head. No words. Just a nod. Celeste nodded back. A torch passed in silence. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed. Janitors nodded with fists to their chests. Young guards flashed thumbs up. When Celeste entered the courtroom for a routine hearing, the entire gallery stood before the clerk could announce her. That had never happened before. She took her seat. The law moved forward. But the air had changed. Justice no longer wore a mask. Months later, Celeste stood before a middle school class. A sign on the chalkboard read, "Belike Judge Monroe." A girl in the back whispered the question that mattered: "Do you still believe in the system?" Celeste paused. "I don't believe in what the system was," she said. "But I believe in what it can become, and I believe in you asking that question." In her car afterward, she cried, not from pain, but hope. The White House call came on a Tuesday. Presidential Medal of Justice. The ceremony was marble stages and flashing cameras, but Celeste only saw the front row, Nain. Megan, now a law student. Reverend Hill. And in the far corner, the quiet girl from the classroom, surrounded by suits. Celeste stepped to the mic. "I wasn't supposed to be here. Not because I didn't earn it, but because systems like this weren't built for people like me." She held up the medal. "This isn't just mine. It's for every woman told to stay silent. Every man told justice wasn't for him. Every child who saw the law and felt fear." The applause wasn't loud. It was reverent, the sound of a nation waking up. Somewhere in a state prison, Hank Riker watched the broadcast on a mounted screen. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stared as the woman he tried to break stood bathed in golden light, honored for the very strength he'd sought to destroy. The screen went black. The silence stayed. This wasn't just a story about one judge. It was about dignity that refuses to kneel, truth that outlasts silence, power that isn't given, taken. Celeste Monroe didn't just uphold the law. She became the line in the sand. Celeste's fight isn't hers alone. Hit share, tag someone who needs this, and join us at the Untold Stories, where every view becomes an act of defiance.